Hello and welcome to Economics and You. I am your host, Mr. Samuelson. Today we are going to be looking at what economists do. And mostly what economists do is they check out models. Different sort of model. Economics is the study of how people, businesses, and nations use their limited resources. We've talked about scarcity in the last couple of lessons, and I'm mentioning it here again because we do have these limited resources. We have to make decisions about how we use them. Economists are the ones that do this within the field of economics. Now, the theories which economists develop are called economic models. So economic models here are the ideas that economists have around why certain things happen in the economy and why people use the resources that they have in the way that they do. They develop these models in order to help explain or predict economic behavior. Now, this can be at an individual, business, or national level when they're trying to explain this behavior, depending on the model they are developing. So what do models show? Well, models are very useful for simplifying complex systems. So an economy is an incredibly complex thing, a whole bunch of moving parts. And what an economist needs to do is they need to simplify this down to a causal relationship. What causes another thing to happen? This will help them to determine how individual people or businesses will react to changes in the economy. It is important here to notice, however, that these are useful, but they're imperfect. There are so many complex variables in the economy, a variable meaning, different things that could have some sort of impact. There's so many of them that it's really difficult to isolate a real causal relationship with one of them. That is, it's difficult to pin down one thing that causes another thing to happen. But they're going to try. And they do this by creating a model. Now, the models are created to examine a specific economic issue. Okay, so one economic issue, what causes this to happen, or how can we impact this? Economists examine the factors which impact the issue. And we're going to look here for an example of teenage unemployment. Okay, if we were to look at teenage unemployment, why are 18 and 19-year-olds unemployed when they're trying to find work? Trying to boil that down to an issue that causes teenage unemployment. There might be several, but an economist in a particular model might want to find out, okay, what is one thing that causes this to happen? And then the economist would hypothesize, very scientific process here, economics is a science. They hypothesize that unemployment could increase when minimum wages increase. Okay, that might be an idea. So, if the minimum wage increases and it becomes more expensive to hire somebody with limited experience, a company might be less willing to do so. All right, so let's test that model now. Testing a model involves carefully collecting and comparing data. You've got to collect a lot of data here to really have an accurate sense of what's happening. In this case, we might collect 30 years of data on teenage unemployment. So look at the teenage unemployment rate over a course of 30 years. When was it high? When was it low? Then we also look at 30 years of minimum wage rates. So look at when that minimum wage is increased, do we see a corresponding drop in teenage unemployment? If the unemployment of teenagers rose every time the minimum wage rose, then the tested model supports the hypothesis. That is, if we were to look at a model and compare all of our data, and we were to see our teenage unemployment rate right here, and then right in 2007, when we have an increase in the minimum wage, do we also see an increase in unemployment? We do. When we see another increase to 655, do we see an increase? Yes. Another increase, do we see another increase? Yes. So this hypothesis is shown in this model to have a positive correlation, that is to actually impact teenage unemployment rates. Doesn't mean it's the only thing, but this data does suggest that those two are related. So this economic model might teach an economist and potentially the government that if you raise if you raise minimum wages, then you will have an increase in teenage unemployment. That is where we get into applying a model to our real life. When we apply these models to real life, we do this to inform the public and the government. So economists study this and they say, hey, government officials, just so you know, I know you're considering raising the minimum wage again. It's going to mean more unemployed kids. Well, people will know then to expect that. It's like they factor that into the decision. It's not just we want to give people a more livable wage, so we're going to raise the minimum wage. It's, well, we now have to consider that that will mean more unemployed kids. That is, more kids who are out of school but don't have a job, potentially getting into some sorts of mischief. So using these models, government can make those decisions. They use models like this to guide tax rates, interest rates, government aid, and a whole bunch of things. They're going to have economists making models so they can have predictions on what's going to happen. Now, what they do with these predictions is complicated because economists don't all agree on how these economics models should be applied. It's like, okay, well, we know that raising the minimum wage will cause more unemployment. But what do we do with that information? Do we not raise the minimum wage? Or do we put in place protections for kids who are now going to be unemployed? Or do we do nothing and just watch this play out? Well, many believe in a policy called laissez-faire. Laissez-faire or laissez-faire is kind of a hands-off policy. This is where the government doesn't act on models. We're aware of them, but we don't do anything. That is, we know that if we raise minimum wage, kids will be unemployed. Okay, so we know that. But we're not going to do anything to stop that unemployment, or maybe not even to raise that minimum wage if you're really a laissez-faire person. Others have an opposite belief. They believe that the government should use models to correct for problems. That is, when we see that this is going to happen, it's like, okay, we want to raise the minimum wage, we're going to have childhood unemployment. What are we going to do about that? Well, let's see if we can't extend free community college to kids. And that will keep those kids active and engaged and advancing their knowledge and strengthening their future earning potential during those teenage years. A few states have done that. And that's just one way that a government might respond. But basically, there are three decisions. Laissez-faire, we just said. Okay, government says we've got two options, X or Y. You do whatever you want. So the public does whatever they want under a leadership style of laissez-faire. Autocratic is, we have the data, we have the economists, we know what's best. You're going to do what's best. X is what's best for you. That's what you've got to do. Then we have the democratic approach. It's like, we know what's best. We know what's going to work. It's X, but you could also do Y. And we're going to let you choose. And if the majority chooses Y, then we're going to all do Y, even though the leadership knows it won't work. That's the democratic approach versus autocratic and laissez-faire. Important that we're aware of those decisions because governments are involved in economic decision making. But we're not going to go deeper into that today. It's just worthwhile bringing up. Well, that's all for today. I hope you learned something. Thank you very much for joining me, and farewell.